what the superpowers really want out of the North Korea crisis. Officially, all involved parties in this crisis want nothing more than peace and tranquility, what we should all know better. The superpowers have all built up North Korea's nuclear capacity and missile capacity directly and or indirectly, be it through the sale of entire reactors, like Russia and the US did, or parts and pieces for rockets, sold by China, the EU, and Russia, or by providing the financial means. The European Union had bought so much overpriced Russian oil and gas before 2014 and the Ukrainian crisis that Moscow could simply erase $11 billion of North Korean debt that reached back to the Cold War, which in turn paid for the nuclear program that is now at the core of the crisis. So basically, my fellow countrymen here in Germany paid for this nuclear program. Every single superpower is now pretending to work hard for a peaceful solution and to consider violence only as a last resort, while defusing the situation becomes less and less likely. And we cannot view the history of this selectively. So yes, the United States had sold a reactor to North Korea, but this was an exchange. North Korea was supposed to give up its other nuclear reactor and related technology going back to the Cold War era and the Russian suppliers. So Russia had indeed sold reactors, some very serious reactors, to North Korea as well. So please don't make this into a distorted East versus West issue. You know, you can't just look at one side of the facts or a selective assortment of the facts. And yes, parts and pieces for the missiles. They're now threatening not just Guam and Hawaii, but the western coast of the US. We see people in California now prepping and buying bunkers and all that stuff. These missiles require a lot of different parts and pieces. So the hull and the propulsion system appear to be of Russian and Chinese origin. You know, experts have looked at these and they said that these are some older designs from the Cold War, most likely China and Russian origin. But there's more that goes into a rocket. There's pressure sensors and there's all kinds of complicated software and hardware. There was a United Nations report dealing with the previous missile tests of North Korea. And the South Koreans, they've collected some of the wreckage of previous launches, and they found interesting pressure sensors from Europe in the wreckage, and they found some other things, and some investigations turned up European software ending up in North Korea's rockets. So a lot of stuff was sold to China over the last years and decades, and all that stuff somehow ended up in North Korea. The Chinese, of course, played dumb. They say we didn't allow this. This was done covertly by the North Koreans. Well, if you want to believe that, sure you can. But you shouldn't. But we can clearly see that North Korea and this whole problem was built up. North Korea and this whole crisis was built up by China, Russia, and the US, by the superpowers. So the actual crisis is not so much about North Korea. North Korea is just a tool, it's just a means to an end. So what are these secret intentions of the superpowers? What are the ends, the means, the ends that supposedly justify the means? Well, let's look at Russia first. Russia's intentions are to conquer territory in Eastern and Northern Europe. Russia does not expect to conquer space in Asia. So that is precisely why a war in Asia between the Koreas, the US, and Japan would be a much needed diversion for Moscow. As long as the US forces are tied up in Asia, Russia thinks it has a free hand in Europe. How far will Russia advance in Europe? As far as possible. And the more entangled the United States is in Asia, the further west Russian forces can advance in Europe until reaching some sort of a deal. Until a line is really drawn. That is the reason Russia has been quietly supporting North Korea. Next, China's secret intentions. The Chinese government does not want to be seen as the one who shot first at the US forces. Therefore, North Korea was built up as a suitable proxy to do the shooting for Beijing. In an ideal scenario for China's communists, North Korea sinks one or more American aircraft carriers and attacks US bases in Guam and Hawaii. A lot of damage would be inflicted without China being directly responsible for it. Kim Jong-un is the perfect setup with his crazy hair and his extreme statements and human rights violations. He will be portrayed as a Hitler-type figure with irrational aspirations. Once the US Navy is decimated, the Chinese hope to rule the oceans. Now let's look at America's secret intentions. The US has indirectly built up the North Korean threat. What's in it? Well, any war with North Korea will inevitably draw in China and catch the Chinese unprepared for a larger war before the year 2020. In that year or shortly after, China planned to be more battle-ready. But now the North Korean war could derail China's timetables and also cause massive sanctions, tanking the Chinese economy and thereby luring, even forcing a panicked China into large and dramatic military moves. Because if China's existence is threatened, or the regime's existence is threatened, the regime will act through their military. NATO could, if it plays this right, paint itself as the free world once again, saving humanity from aggressors. Now, could this all be a ruse for world government? We cannot rule out the possibility that the superpowers are already aligned at the very top, or semi-aligned, using the artificial crisis to scare the world into accepting world government, or to use a world war to decimate populations and have it result in a world government nonetheless. We cannot be sucked deeper into a primitive East-West paradigm that is propped up by relentless propaganda worldwide, including the alternative media. It is designed to discredit critical voices and give rise to a new McCarthy-era witch hunt. Obviously, the NATO empire wants critical people here in the West and dissidents to become too friendly with the Russians and the Chinese and even get entangled, right? Become traitors. That's a very simple trick, but it seems to work pretty efficiently so far. So, of course it could be that these superpowers are separate indeed and they want to fight it out, and now this is a derailment of the initial timetables of China and Russia. So a betrayal by America. America had built up, and the European Union, the NATO sphere had built up China and Russia throughout the last 50 to 100 years. But maybe now it's betrayal time. You know, we've seen this before. You build up an enemy and then you strike it down according to a preset plan, script. That is another strong possibility, and the North Korean crisis could be the start of a real world war. Doesn't necessarily have to mean the end of the world, but of course it's still a very, very, very serious situation. And yeah, North Korea, maybe the United States, or NATO, is now forcing this issue, stepping on the gas, trying to get this war going in order to derail China's and Russia's timetables, you know, for their own military overhaul. So we're going to keep you posted on this channel. Please subscribe to us and support us on Patreon. Comment on this video below and tell us what you think.